Hello, welcome to the show. As Africa journeys on an energy transition path and economic development peculiar to her demand, one thing is imperative: finance. At the first Africa Local Content Investment Forum, organized by the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board in partnership with Heritage Times Media, we discussed on a panel session on the opportunities and strategies in creating an enabling hydrocarbon development financing framework for exploration and reserve expansions in Africa. Mr. Sagna, we've been discussing, regional financing as the climate change bell is ringing. Is that going to be sustainable? Are we going to only be looking at regional financing? Will that be sustainable for hydrocarbon developments in Africa?
If you look at our history, we have had these regional blocs that have tried to solve some problems, whether it's ECOWAS and then SADC. Now we have the Africa Continental Free Trade. I think the same way the continent has gone from local to regional to continental, we need to approach hydrocarbon that way. It needs to be a continental solution. The one other thing I will add to it is we need to understand that as a continent, we need to embrace the notion of integrity. So integrity by definition is what you think and what you say and what you feel are identical. You need to be really in tune with your reality. So the energy transition theme is one that is a global reality and most importantly, a big Western problem. So to rush to embrace to solve someone else's problem when you have not solved your own, you have an absolute integrity problem. And we need to be cognizant of it.
All right. So still with you, Mr. Sagna, the Afri-Exim Bank is very much in support of hydrocarbon development in Africa. And we hear that steps are being taken internally to give structure to its financing. So kindly tell us what the bank is doing and what the steps are in regards to this.
So as I said earlier, our exposure and our work in the oil and gas territory is just massive. So we're really collaborating with our friends at Apple and other institutions to take this to light, ideally before the end of this year, if all goes well. We're really working closely with the authorities and seeking to formalize something that can go within the continental agenda. We believe that the continental agenda is to pursue fossil fuel while attending to the new development within renewable energy. So that agenda will crystallize without giving too much detail before end of this year. What we can promise is that in a true form of our tradition, we will aim to deliver.
Fantastic. So, okay, over to you, Mr. Zakaria Doso. You are the Director General of the Africa Investment Corporation. Kindly give us insights into the organization and its role it serves in financing hydrocarbon developments in Africa.
Okay, thank you so much, Madam. Africa Energy Investment Corporation in 2019, during an extraordinary meeting of the Council of Ministers, it was in Abuja, the 26th of January, to give you more detail. And it has been established from the reform of Apple Fund for Technical Cooperation, which used to be the small a small financial institution owned by Apple, but for internal studies and projects of Apple. The ministers of Apple noticed that this context of energy transition and this dependence, as I mentioned earlier, on foreign funding is very critical for our industry. So we should do something to get our independence and build our own financial capability so that we cannot have some issue when the European Western countries withdraw their funding. And to start, they gave it authorized capital of 1 billion. We know that this sector is very, very capital intensive. So this is a start, and we are currently in the equity fundraising. And fortunately, as my good friend Ibrahim said, we are working closely with them to raise up to $1 billion, and we are hoping getting this fund by the end of this year so that we can fully start operation, funding this sector, and somehow get our independence also.
Thank you very much. So I'll come over to you, Mr. Rane. Your company, UTM Limited, is the first local content in Africa to get the licensing of a floating, processing, and storage liquefied natural gas vessel. Give us an insight of what the financial framework for this colossal task is.
Thank you very much. Like you said, this is the first indigenous company in Africa that is taking up on these challenges to build the first floating FLNG. It's a huge capital-intensive project, and you cannot secure that kind of funding in country. What we've done, we've prepared a project feasibility study and a bankability of the project. Once you get those right, then you approach the investors. But for you to approach investors in Europe and America and Asia, you need a gateway. That is the reason why we have an Afrasian Bank in the midst. Afrasian Bank has a mandate on behalf of UTM to raise equity and debt for the project. As we speak today, we have the best in the world indicating interest to be part of this project in terms of equity and debt. And when I said earlier on that there's still huge opportunity for funding in Africa, I was saying it from the point of practical experience in our interaction with investors in Europe. We just had NMPC Afrasian Bank Investment Forum in London. At that summit, the investors that gathered in the venue for the discussion, they were all interested to fund projects in Africa, irrespective of the energy transition that is ongoing. So for us in UTM, I believe that the Nigerian government has created the enabling environment for investors. The world is moving out of fossil fuel, but there's an energy transition, which is the gas. So we've gone out, we've put our project before the world, we receive expression of interest, we receive beyond our imagination the level of funding commitment to this project. And that's the reason Afrasian Bank went further to say, can we aggregate excess investors into a phase 2 of the project? So as we speak today, hopefully by the grace of God, we are pursuing our program aggressively to take an FID end of this quarter, first quarter next year to commence construction. We believe that the appetite for gas development and funding is still there in the international community. Because of the huge capital investment, it's difficult to raise this kind of money in Africa. And so therefore, the reason why this conference is quite interesting is to put Africa together to look at how we start thinking of inward development and have a way to showcase our potential leading the charge by an indigenous company. And that's what UTM is doing on behalf of Africa to the world. Thank you.
Amazing. So over to you, Mr. Mbaye. Senegal Local Content
is a new kid on the block. Tell us what you hope to achieve in local content in Senegal.
Yeah, thank you. As you said, we are new in the sector. We are knocking on the door of Apple. I hope that we will be welcome soon. In local content activities in Senegal, we have already realized some interesting things. One is we achieve to set up all the framework, legal framework of local content. Also, the institutional framework also is already done. We start the work and we try for especially financing, we try to set up a fund which will be support local content activities. As you know, we have to do several things in training peoples, in supporting our local companies, in order to upgrade them, to make them able to play in the sector, which have strict standard to reach. And we are working in all that things. And in financial aspect, as I said, we will use our fund once it will be abundant. We will use it to finance the activities in local content sector.
Fantastic. So we wish you the very best, and we hope to see Senegal flying soon.
Thank you.
So over to you, Mr. Sagna. We've been now discussing regional financing. How will we deal with polarization of funding member countries? Do you think that will arise, or how do we create an equilibrium to handle stable financing across Africa?
Thank you, Riju. I think it's our good friend, Mr. Farouk, that pointed it out this morning when he was discussing Apple and their view on energy. I think somehow African nations need to make this a priority. The same way you heard the steps that were taken to get a local content law. Basically, it is a law. So there is a certain amount of money that goes into this effort without any consultation. So there is a need to actually look at the continent and realize that historically there are institutions that are national oil companies. There are countries that have excess reserve. There are also some fluctuations that are arising even in the price of oil. So I think some of the ideas that are being contemplated with Apple and others is find a way to make sure that continentally wise, the same way you have pension funds, you also have oil companies. So those institutions in many ways need to commend some sort of destiny for all. There's enough capital on the continent. Obviously these projects are capital extensive, but if you look at the savings of our nations through their pension fund and other institutions, those numbers are massive. They're just beyond massive. You look at the numbers that PENCOM represent today and what they used to represent 20 years ago or 15 years ago. It's a dramatic shift. In the meantime, most of the capital of those countries via various savings tend to not necessarily attend to this issue. So there has to be some sort of solution to push everybody centrally behind an institution like Apple or a leading coordinator, and I think APO has that force of congregation to basically push concentration of capital, almost like a levy. And that basically sits for the purpose of base financing, and then you go to the foreigner. It doesn't make sense to go to the foreigner and say, Oga, please help solve my problem. In the meantime, he's looking at you, expensive suit, expensive watch, but you're not solving the problem. So we need to also put our base equity, our base contribution. Because the other thing also, President Orama tells us, and we remind everybody we speak to, is that the problems you have on the continent, they're rarely by accident. We are a legacy of colonization. So solving these problems is not going to be without intent. So for these things, they're not going to accidentally get solved unless we force some laws, some rules, some framework where, irrespective of the change of government, we can make that change. So from that standpoint, it's important to constitute something continental via a law or regulation, but that forces some sort of a levy.
Thank you very much. Yes, clap. So Mr. Zakaria, the value chain across the hydrocarbon industry is quite some process. Kindly give us a funding focus in order of priority. What should we be looking at first?
Yes, the value chain of hydrocarbon is very complex. But our mission is to mobilize funding for the development of all the industry. The production, exploration production in our sector in Africa is mainly owned by international oil company. I cannot call that as development. So that means we have also something to do there. But the most important thing should be also in terms of value added. The speakers mentioned there, almost a majority of our crude oil is exporting outside Africa. And this is a very, very great challenge. That means we have to do something to add value on this or crude oil. That means we have to think about a refinery to get on our ground refined products, even go beyond with petrochemical also. I think doing so, we can have a very great step in terms of local content, because who says building hydrocarbon as Dangote is doing, for example, means creating value, creating jobs, also improving expertising among we African also. And financiers should think about it and promote projects in terms of refinery. We should also think about transportation. One of the speakers said also Nigeria is more gas producer. So we have, as we say every time, more than 600 million people living outside access to electricity. Gas to power can be used for that. Funding is very needed for this sector also. So we need pipeline for gas, go where it is needed to have electricity producing from gas also. And that means also some storage capacity also. So those are some sectors I think we should put priority over to develop this critical sector for our economy.
Thank you very much. So you say value addition, transportation, and storage. The leaders are here, and I hope that they would put that into deep consideration. So over to you, Mr. Rane. Gas is a delicate resource, and it has been labeled Africa's energy transition fuel. How do you think Africa is posed in handling this resource?
Thank you very much. Like you just mentioned, gas is a transition fuel. I believe that this is the time for Africa to develop our gas resources, because there is still opportunity, there's still window before the West completely migrate out of fossil fuel. Since we have gas in the middle to mitigate and to take care of our losses from crude oil production, Africa should concentrate more to develop our gas resources. In Nigeria alone, we have over trillions of gas that is underdeveloped. So if Nigeria develop our gas resources, Nigeria is the leading production country in Africa in terms of oil and gas. The other African countries are queuing behind our steps. So Nigeria has declared gas, a decade of gas this period, to fast-track the gas development in Nigeria. And I believe other African countries are watching the leadership role that Nigeria is playing in the gas sector. You agree with me that if we develop the gas in-country requirements alone, Nigeria is importing LPG, and we have natural gas that we can liquefy to support domestic requirements. So for us at UTM, what we see first in our project, the LPG that we're going to produce, which is over 200,000 metric tons per annum, we'll use that to support the domestic requirement for Nigeria. We said to our investors, they've agreed with us that Nigeria is one of the leading countries that import LPG into this country. And all our off-takers have agreed that this product, the propane, the LPG, will be sold in country to support the requirement and support government initiative to make Nigeria an independent transit for petrol, kerosene, and using the other ways to use gas to support power, to use gas to support domestic requirement in terms of we are today importing too many gas into this country. Once we have the LPG supported by the Nigeria LNG and all the other gas projects that is coming up in the country, Nigeria will lead the charge, and other African countries will see that as an avenue to develop their gas resources. Mozambique just deployed their first floating FLNG. As we're speaking today, by next month, their first cargo will be shipped of LPG and LNG out for export. This was done for an asset that is offshore stranded gas, just like what we have in Nigeria. So the technology that is currently being used to assess this stranded gas, and I believe that with the support of Nigerian government and all the regulatory authorities like NCDMB, Upstream Commission, definitely Nigeria will develop our gas potential, which by extension will rub off on all the other African continents who are looking forward to Nigerian leadership in the oil and gas industry. Thank you.
Amazing. Mr. Sagna, we'll be closing this session. So in all we said, do you think the Afrexim Bank is leading or taking a lead in developing a finance framework for funding hydrocarbon in Africa?
Thank you, Uju. I think we are raising our hand whenever we are given a chance to. So we'll be happy to do that alongside APO, all the members for NBCC, and that's a chance we welcome and will continue to do. I think the one thing I will observe and I will invite the audience to observe is that if you look at the panel, you have a son of the soil, it's Mr. Rone, that has decided to take on this vast and colossal journey on his own shoulders, where typically you would have seen, a foreign Oyibo company coming to drive this. But he's taken it on his own. He could have decided to continue to consume his trading income and live his peaceful life, have 20 houses in London, in different places of the world, but he decided to bring his economic strength, intellectual expertise, and knowledge to the home country. The same way you have APO that has decided that this was important. he decided to put together an institution to attend to energy. So this is something, we have lots of problems, but we need to recognize that slowly we are heading towards the right direction. Because for many, many years after independence, most of our countries have solely focused on continuing to do what was done, although they were independent. The infrastructure that you see in most African countries, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's other industries, was constructed by the former colonizer. You go to some countries, not much has been added since. And as a consequence, the trade happens only with the former master, which is a symptomatic of not realizing that you're free. So I think it's very important that we all start claiming our freedoms with actions. There's going to be countries that are still not aware that they are free, but until you dictate your agenda, you're agenda-less. And Africa needs to become quickly less agenda-less.
Thank you. The message was clear. So I want to thank you again, my dear panelists. And we want the audience to bear in mind that this is not just another talk session. We really hope that these discussions begin to set the frameworks that Africa needs to develop its hydrocarbon, especially at this time. We need to come out fast, we need to come out strong, and show the world that we really can do this. Thank you very much.